With the first World Championships just a few short weeks away, let's have a little fun today and make some predictions on how we think the outcomes of some of these matches are going to go. What do we think is going to decide them? How are playoffs going to challenge? And then what do we think the Decode season is going to be remembered for at the end? So here's how our predictions are going to work. I've got a slider bar here with some different categories. I've got a prediction on a sliding scale from 0 to 100, 1 to 10, however it is you want to go about that. You make your prediction where you think things are going to go. I'll make my prediction where things are going to go. Let me know in the comments down below if we are at all accurate on even close in some of those. So one of the big things that I think we've seen a lot this season is talking about the robot meta and whether offensibility is going to end up defeating defensibility in the end. What I mean by that is as we're getting further into some of these high quality matches, the more and more I'm noticing is that there are small defensive plays that are happening, but some of these robots that have such fast drivetrains and such high throughput on their shooters makes it really so that there's not much of a, I can't say benefit, but at least in the close triangle, there's not a huge benefit in playing defense because these robots are just so fast getting around the field that it actually ends up harming some of you. That doesn't be said back in the far triangle that there's still reason to play defense. But I think at the end of the day, do we think that that offensive ability is going to beat over where that defensive ability is going to come up with? And, there will be some small minor plays perhaps on that defensive ability, or do you think it's going to end up ranking things out a lot more? I'm of the opinion that I think that offensive is definitely going to beat, I definitely think that offensive is going to be defensive when it comes into the world champs here. There may be more defense being played in that rear triangle. I'm not so confident. One thing that I do think might happen is that there might be some robots that have some significant breakage that will definitely knock some better performing teams out in the past. Now, on to the next idea. Is there going to be a dedicated defender in finalist alliances? I think likely not. You'll probably see more of that happening inside of FRC, where you can have 3 robots, but with just having 2 robots might not end up coming back. Again, simply because of just how fast some of these robots are. It's really challenging to be able to get some of these up and going. Now, when it comes to the average winning score, both in qualifiers and in playoffs, how likely do you think the average score is going to be of something quite high of, say, 220 points? I'm going to say that at this point in time, I'm pretty confident that most of them are going to be, I might even tick this up just a little bit more. I'd say that the average winning score once you go across is probably likely to be about 220 points. Now, do we think that there's going to be a match that cracks the 400 points? Likely. There may be a match that gets up in that 450, and let's talk about that. What's going to be that newest, highest single match record, or is it going to be a new world record set? How likely do you think there's going to be a new world record at the championships? I think there's pretty darn likely. Now, the question becomes, what do we think that highest score is? Do we think it's going to be, because right now I believe the world record is 397, at least at the time that I'm recording this. And do we think we're going to see 400? Probably. Is there going to be teams that are going to start cracking 420, 430? I'm going to put my number. I think that the world record by the time things are all said and done is going to be roughly 420 points by the time that's all said and done. That's where I'm putting my mark on. What do you think is going to be that match final total? Now, something that's going to be interesting coming up is these move ranking points, the goal ranking points, and the pattern ranking points. Particularly in those qualifying tournaments, we now know what the new scores are for the move ranking point. It's still 21. It has stayed 21. What percentage of matches during those playoffs do you think that teams are going to be getting that move ranking point? I'm going to say upwards of 80% plus. Teams are likely going to be hitting that move ranking point because you only need 21 points for that. And for the 21 points, that's 2 robots scoring the leave point. By the time you get to the World Championships, I'd be really surprised if teams not have functioning autos to the point we're just able to at least leave that white line or leave that launch line. That would be quite surprising. Are there going to be teams that are going to push really hard and try to get as high autonomous scoring? I think that's actually more likely that teams aren't going to have some tuned autonomouses so that when they finish, they end up finishing on that line and missing out on some of those ranking points and potentially knocking themselves out of that captain point. Or I guess it's not calling a captain anymore. It's now alliance leader or something like that. Now, for the goal ranking points, you now need to get 67 artifacts through the goal by the time it's all said and done. How likely is it that I think teams are going to be getting 67 plus inside of that? Based off the average winning score, I'm not as confident. I would say probably about 2/3 of matches, teams are going to be hitting that goal ranking point in some of their playoffs. And again, this really depends on how much defense is being played. On matches where higher defense is being played, there are a lot lower scores. Now, it depends on how fast that robot can get around that field, and it seems like quite nimble robots are definitely starting to overtake some of these matches. For the pattern ranking point, the percentage of matches for how many of them are going to be getting that. Now, the pattern ranking point, I believe, also hasn't changed. It is still, or it's changed slightly. It's like 22 points in all total. Might want to correct me on that, but it's not a very high scoring point. It's either, I believe it was 6 in one and 5 in the other. But I think that as we're seeing teams really prioritize at high throughput, I don't think that that pattern ranking points could be hit in many of these matches. And I think when it comes to being an alliance lead, this pattern ranking point is probably going to be the one that ends up making or breaking it inside for those matches. You know, teams that are more likely to have that pattern ranking point are more likely to be that alliance captain. I think that this is going to be that defining ranking point matter with that pattern, particularly because we're seeing that high throughput wins matches. And without or spending the time to say slow down to make sure that your artifacts are going in that correct order might not end up getting there. Now, if we were to just base it off, if you were just to fire pure purple right into the end, so you have your, inside your autonomous, if you fire pure purple, you're going to get 6 out of 9. So 6 times 2 is 12. And then if you fire pure purple again for your final section, that's again another 6 out of 9. That's another 12. That's 24 points. So honestly, if you just throw pattern completely out the window and only launch purple artifacts in that final, say you have some sort of algorithm that's able to kick out a green so that you're not able to throw one of those out, or you make sure you pick up from the human player in the end, instead of picking up that purple, just launching in purples and just completely ignoring the green will score you that pattern ranking point. That's something we were talking about since the start of the season, is that just firing in 9 purples, you got a higher likelihood of hitting that you do for actually trying to hit the pattern. So I wonder if some teams will actually come up with some sort of algorithm to say reject a green and just launch purples. You might honestly end up with a higher likelihood of getting in there. Now, match decided by a foul. What percentages of matches do you think are going to end up being decided by foul points? We've been seeing that foul points this year have been absolutely brutal, and it has been really affecting some of these matches and has been swinging a lot of these matches too. For instance, I know for 2 of the 3 teams that I mentor at our national championships, matches were decided by fouls for a good chunk of the playoffs. And that's actually ended up being why one of my teams ended up going to the World Championships and the other teams going to the European Championships instead. So for matches percentages, I think close to 1/3 are going to be decided by a foul. And because even if teams are doing lots and lots of driver practice, you make mistakes, especially on these high energy levels. And one of the things that's going to be tough about this World Championships is that all of the event playing areas are now up, I believe, on a 24-inch riser or 60-centimeter riser. So there's a huge height difference in how the games are going to be played. And that's going to change how drivers are going to be driving around, because you have a different environment for how these things are going to go. You've been practicing with it at floor level, and now all of a sudden you are 24 inches, 60-ish centimeters up higher, which is going to be a harder thing to shift for drivers to adjust for. And you might want to start practicing as if these things have shifted. Now, when it comes to the finals, I'm talking about, be it the finals for the Da Vinci playoffs total. So that is once all 6 playoffs has happened and you've got the round robins. And once the round robins are done, you have 2 final alliances from all of the 6. How likely is it they're going to be that they're going to go to only 2 matches and not have best of 3? I think it's a 50-50. I'm slightly more on the side of saying that I think that there's going to be 3 matches, but I'm not all that confident that things are going to be going there, particularly when we've seen in past World Championships, there's a lot of fighting back and forth with these, and there's a lot of impact that's happening. You might have robots, particularly with lots of stress of the competition, at high-level competition for the last 4 days. You might have something that breaks in that last final match, and that is always a concern. Now, how likely do I think that the finals themselves are going to be decided by a foul? I think that there might be a final match that are going to be ended up decided by a foul. I think it's more likely than not that some of these foul points are really going to add up and really going to affect a game, particularly because some of these scores are so close that if a team fouls and some of these fouls are so large, I think it's likely that a foul is going to end up deciding the World Championships. I hope that it doesn't. I think it's likely. And it would be a shame for a team to end up not winning because of a foul that goes in. So making sure that they're being played within the rules. Now, the last one here is, what do you think the season is going to be remembered for? Do you think it's going to be remembered for turn shooters? Do you think it's going to be remembered for multi-fixed shooters? Something that's a little more fun, say catapults, things along those lines. This one's more of a sliding scale. I would say that I am far more likely to think that this is going to be remembered for the turret shooter. When you look at some of the designs that are really starting to dominate that high-level class, the turret-based shooter with the high throughput is definitely starting to dominate and has been dominating for a while in the DECODE season. So I think that this is where some of the top robots are going to end up being remembered for. This isn't to be saying that the multi-fix shooters aren't impressive robots, but I think that when people think about DECODE, they're going to be thinking about the turret shooter. When I think about some of the more creative designs, though, I'm more on the multi-fixed shooter side, particularly some of those triple catapult designs. I think they're a lot of fun. I think it's really cool to see creative engineering that breaks away. So those are some of my predictions. Having a bit more fun today, given that we're only a few weeks away. Curious what your thoughts are, particularly on those final matches going to fouls. Do you think that that's really going to end up deciding some of those games? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys all at the World Championships this year in a few weeks.